Welcome to the wild, wonderful Gospel of Mark. Because of the nature of the next few weeks, today I'm embarking a little bit on a Bible study kind of sermon, and we've inserted the Gospel right in the middle of it. Well, for probably centuries, Mark has been looked down a bit, looked down upon by Christians. It's so different. It's so short. There's no birth story. And even much of the ending, which we'll get to in a few weeks, raises some questions. Compared to the storytelling of Matthew and Luke or the theological grandeur of the Gospel of John, Mark can seem a bit slight, a bit bare-boned. Forget the fact that Mark is obviously the very first Gospel. This is shown both by physical and textual evidence. Matthew and Luke obviously write their Gospels with a copy of Mark in front of them that they change somewhat to meet their own Gospel purposes. No such chunks of Matthew and Luke are found anywhere, and John, whom we know wrote later for a number of reasons, didn't seem to have any Gospel in front of him. So as the first Gospel, Mark should be worthy of respect. After all, the author brought the form of the gospel into being. But as we would eventually realize, there were other reasons to give Mark some respect. Have you ever seen a movie in IMAX or 3D or put on goggles so that you can experience virtual reality? Well, all of those technologies exist to give the participant a sense that they are really part of the action. And for centuries, the written word has been employed to do the same thing for us as we use our imaginations. And Mark, it turns out, is a master of this art. When you read this book with the proper lens, and you remember that it would have been a solo book all by itself and would have been read to people who had really no idea who this Jesus was, well, then you realize the book sets you on a quest. The same quest that the disciples are on. The quest to figure out, who is this guy? Now, the story starts innocently enough. We are told in verse 1 that this is the gospel of Jesus Christ, Son of God. But we immediately have to remember that Son of God, to a first century Jewish listener, didn't mean the same thing as it means to us. For example, in the Old Testament, Son of God is used in a variety of ways. Like when God says, if King Solomon will act in a certain way, then I will be his father and he will be my son. Now, certainly the title is a hint that Jesus is Messiah. But what kind of Messiah? With what kind of abilities? That remains to be seen. Plus, we have to remember as Jesus gathers his disciples and sets them off on their journey together, well, the disciples don't have the advantage, we should say, of being able to read along in the book. Well, almost immediately, hints as to who Jesus really is begin to drop. They went to Capernaum, and when the Sabbath came, he entered the synagogue and taught. They were astounded at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority and not as the scribes. Just then there was a man in the synagogue with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, "What do you have to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of Israel, the Holy One of God." But Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be silent, and come out of him." And the unclean spirit, convulsing him and crying out with a loud voice, came out of him. They were all amazed, and they kept asking one another, "What is this? A new teaching with authority. He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." At once his fame began to spread about the surrounding region of Galilee. Well, welcome to a theme in Mark. The world of demons and spirits has a leg up on the disciples. They know Jesus in spirit by sight. Now, it is generally accepted that in the Bible, when we talk of someone having an unclean spirit, that would be akin to having a mental illness today. But no matter what form this illness really took, This is a theme. The demons know Jesus by sight. The disciples not so much. But doubtless they are in awe here, not just because of the exorcism, but because of the way Jesus teaches. The story goes on. As soon as they left the synagogue, they entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Now Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they told him of her at once. He came and took her by the hand and lifted her up. Then the fever left her, and she began to serve them. Now the power of Jesus hits the disciples square in the forehead. Simon Peter's own mother-in-law is healed. It's another hint. Jesus is not only the Lord of the spiritual, He's the Lord of the physical as well. Illness is no match for Him. That evening at sundown, they brought to Him all who were sick or possessed with demons, and the whole city was gathered around the door. And He cured many who were sick with various diseases and cast out many demons. And He would not permit the demons to speak because they knew Him. In the morning, while it was still dark, He got up and went to a deserted place, and there He prayed. And Simon and his companions hunted for Him. When they found Him, they said to Him, "Everyone is searching for you." He answered, "Let us go on to the neighboring towns, so I may proclaim the message there also, for that is what I came out to do." And He went throughout Galilee, proclaiming the message in their synagogues and casting out demons. And with this, we hear something else that will be very important. Jesus isn't just about having a medicine show. There's something more, a message to be proclaimed. Now, gospel means good news. And we will see Jesus employ that word in some interesting ways in the weeks ahead. But what we will also see is that everything Jesus does is part and parcel of that message. A leper came to Him, begging Him, and kneeling before Him, He said to him, "If you choose, you can make me clean." Moved with pity, Jesus stretched out His hand and touched him and said, "I do choose. Be made clean." Immediately the leprosy left him, and he was made clean. After sternly warning him, He sent him away at once, saying to him, "See that you say nothing to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer for your cleansing what Moses commanded as a testimony to them." Another hint, and maybe a shot across the bow of the religious establishment. Jesus, moved by pity, empathizing with the leper, cures him, and then tells him to go to the priest and tells him to essentially offer for his cleansing what the old law commanded. To pay for, essentially, something to happen that's already happened, so that the priests will know, even if he's not to tell anyone else. But He went out and began to proclaim it freely and to spread the word, so that Jesus could no longer go into a town openly, but stayed out in the country, and people came to Him from every quarter. Another theme from Mark. Every time Jesus says, "Shh, don't tell," people tell. And they can't stop. And it gets to the point where, like with John the Baptist, people actually have to come to see Jesus. Well, one of the things the author of Mark has been accused of is being rather flat with his portrayal of the disciples. Read the wrong way, they seem almost like cartoonish buffoons, dunderheads. But the idea is that we are to project ourselves into their role. We are to wonder what they would have been wondering. When a demon says, "What do you have to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us?" Obviously with the full knowledge that Jesus can destroy them, that's to make us ask the question the disciples would ask. Who is this guy? What is this? The challenge for us is to read Mark, or any part of the Bible, as it was meant to be read, by itself, without three other Gospels hovering around it, without our preconceived notions about who this Jesus is, and with an open heart as to what this gospel Jesus is talking about might mean. And if we manage to do this, we'll see what Mark has to teach us about Jesus, about the kingdom of God, and yeah, it's pretty revolutionary. But why should we bother? Why bother trying to approach Mark while forgetting what we think we know? Well, because our Bible and our faith honestly have been abused. Think of these biblical truths. This too shall pass. Spare the rod, spoil the child. God won't give you any more than you can handle. Everything happens for a reason. Satan tempted Eve in the garden with the apple. God works in mysterious ways. Cleanliness is next to godliness. Mary Magdalene was a prostitute. God helps those who help themselves. All of these biblical truths, none of them are in the Bible. None of them. Yes, some of them are interpretations or extrapolations from biblical texts, but most are sketchy or plain wrong. And let's face it, making an extrapolation or an interpretation of a text doesn't make that text part of the Bible. As we approach Mark, we need to do it like N.T. Wright would say. He's a scholar who says we should approach the Bible with first century eyes and 21st century questions. And we need to recognize that our society has polluted and twisted the gospel message, and we carry the weight of that into our sincere efforts to understand. We got to give ourselves permission to read the Bible as its authors intended and as it's meant to be. Not as God. The Bible is not God. What it is a wonderful finger pointing to Christ, pointing to God. So with all of this in mind, we shall begin with the gospel of Jesus Christ, Son of God.